The opinions, viewpoints, and beliefs presented on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the management, the affiliates and broadcast partners, or the sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Between science and ignorance, there is filler.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome to Paranormal Filler. I'm your host, Wes Forsyth. And yes, if you're trying to watch the video, I am still having video problems. Things just don't work out for me. I want to welcome everybody to the show. My guest tonight is Seth Breedlove, producer and director of Minerva Monster and The Beast of Whitehall. And with him is Brandon Dalo. He's composer and producer. Have them on here in just a moment. So I'm just working out some bugs here. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, I want to welcome everybody. Of course, Paranormal Filler is brought to you every week by LiveParanormal.com, the paranormal social community with live interactive broadcasting. And it's sponsored by Ken Boggle's House of Cards, tarotbyken.com. If you are lucky enough to be able to get the video to work, I am honoring tonight's episode by wearing my flannel shirt. But it's not going to record, so I don't even know if I'm going to fool with it because I don't think anybody's watching. So I'm just going to not worry about that and do the show the old-fashioned way. Also, I mean, this weather, Snowzilla. This has been Snowzilla. So I'm going to get on with the show here. It's a shame the webcam's not working because I don't think anybody that would be watching that has a paid membership has ever seen me wear flannel. I'm going to warn the gentleman on the line that they'll probably see a glitch when I actually cut off one of the video feeds here. This is to preserve my bandwidth and give my listeners a good quality show. And boy, am I getting a lot of background noise today, but that's okay. So, Seth, if you want to, you can cut off your webcam because I'm not going to be watching you now because it all seems like a moot point. Welcome to the show, Seth and Brandon.
Hey, thanks for having us. Hello.
Everybody, now, let me get my show notes out here. Basically, these gentlemen are running about the country, filming, I would call it documentaries about, and the name of the production company is Small Town Monsters, and basically, so far what I've seen is, and I'm sure you've got other things that you're in the pipeline, but it's Bigfoot stories as told locally. Is that a good way to characterize what you're trying to produce here, to preserve the oral history and the local history of Bigfoot sightings?
Yeah, it's not just Bigfoot, but the first three are definitely going to be Bigfoot centric. But it's kind of about these famous sightings and then how they kind of impact the local community. And it's kind of basically at the heart of it, it's about preserving the stories. But the definite hook of it is just to see how it impacted the community as well.
Now, I did not get time to watch the Minerva Monster link that you sent me.
Mm-hmm.
But I did get to watch the rough cut of The Beast of Whitehall. And I enjoyed it in that I liked, you know what, anytime somebody sends me one of these, I'm expecting any minute for the guy to come stomping out of the woods wearing the Bigfoot suit, to recreate what the people saw. But, you all didn't go for that. And the one thing that hung on me, the artist renderings, where did those come from?
It kind of depends on what you're talking about. There's obviously like our one of the things we do avoid is like the overdramatic recreations. So the renderings throughout the movie are kind of all over the map. One of the guys named Maz Adams did the kind of pencil sketches of the creature's face, and you see those just during one section of the movie. There's another guy named Matt Harris, and he did the 3 color paintings that kind of showed up in the movie. He did 2 of the scenes of the police officers in the field with the creature, and then he did one of the 3 boys in the truck looking out the window at the creature. And then there's Eric Miner did 2 of the other illustrations, and I can't remember if there's anything else in there. But a couple of those are actually original, like 1976 drawings.
And I didn't really keep track of it, but another thing you, because you are trying to preserve this as close to the history as possible, every now and then you flip to a basically a picture of a newspaper article. How well was this actually covered? When we're talking about the Beast of Whitehall, how well was it covered?
It was extremely well covered because I know within the first week that everything started happening, there were 2 newscasts on TV, and then the newspaper did the local newspaper did at least 3 or 4, and I think at least one of those got picked up by the AP and kind of ran coast to coast. So, I mean, this was a pretty big incident when it all occurred. And of course, there was also the UFO sightings that were taking place around the same time. So that's all kind of going on concurrent. And so I definitely know that there was a lot of coverage of this story.
Okay, now to bring our listeners up to speed, we'll go ahead. We'll talk about the Beast of Whitehall first, since that's the one I really saw and know more about. Mm-hmm. But then we'll go back and we'll cover Minerva Monster, and we'll talk about your next project also. Mm-hmm. But this Beast of Whitehall, although there was a sighting on a golf course of Bigfoot, for lack of a better word. Then my understanding is it was a week later that's when the really in-depth multiple witness event occurred, correct?
No, and the golf course sighting was actually a year prior to the A-Bear incident. I'm not sure what time of year did Cliff's sighting take place. I'm not sure. I feel like it was around the same time of year, though.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we go to the A-Bear incident, which is named after the road that it all happened on, and that's when I guess you could say the community got involved. You want to give our listeners a brief rundown of the story?
Yeah, I'll do the quick run through, and then Brandon can correct me when I leave something vital out. Basically, there were 2 kids in a pickup truck driving on a back road late one night, and they came across what they called a creature. It was an upright, walking, hair-covered, glowing, red-eyed being out in this field, out in the middle of nowhere, about a mile or 2, about 3 miles outside of Whitehall, New York, in the Adirondacks. And they drove down the road, turned around, came back, creature's still there, so they hightail it into Whitehall. They get another kid, and the 3 of them come out, and the thing is still there. So they turn around again, drive back to Whitehall, and this time they get the police because one of the boys that was in the truck, Paul Goslin, his father was the chief of police in Whitehall, and his brother was a law officer as well. So they get the police, and basically the night kind of culminates with the 3 boys and about 8 members of law enforcement sighting this creature in a field outside of Whitehall. Now, the movie kind of documents that sighting, but that sighting was kind of just part of the incident. The incident took place over the course of that week. The very next night, Brian Gosselin, Paul's older brother, had a sighting there that is documented in the movie. But we kind of go in depth on that whole week-long series of events, and then kind of, not just the Whitehall and how it impacted Whitehall, but also, the Adirondacks in general, and how this kind of Bigfoot legend and lore is kind of built into the Adirondack region and has been prevalent in that area for centuries. Did I miss anything?
No, the Franklin Farron thing.
Oh yeah, there was a shooting. There was a reported shooting of an unusual creature that same week that the sighting happened.
Was that in the documentary? I don't even remember that part.
It's a blink and you miss it moment in the movie.
Okay.
A guy that lived on the other side of Abear Road, on a road that kind of runs behind Abear, reported seeing this creature and firing shots at it. I don't know, did he say he hit it?
No, he didn't say.
Okay. He didn't say he hit it, but he definitely saw he fired shots at it, and he filed a police report with Whitehall PD about it, too.
Okay, so the guy shoots like I do, okay?
Yeah, yeah. Or me.
Or he hit it, you don't know, because it kind of stopped coming around.
Yeah.
Immediately after that.
It wasn't well documented by like newspaper or news media or anything like that, and we only found out about the incident because of Paul Bartholomew, who's our local historian in the movie. He had actually found the police logbook that documented that particular incident.
I remember that now in the documentary. You show the I don't know if it was a police log or I think it might have been the police log as printed in the paper, because it stuck in my head just then because they said 12 gauge bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I guess it could have been a slug, but as a rule, 12 gauges do not have bullets.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay, so now I will say, as far as it not coming back, I have found that most animals in the wild, when the impact, without hitting them, they know something's not right.
Right.
And they hightail it from the area.
Yeah.
Now, of course, one of the big things that kind of, I guess you could say, the documentary points out is, even though this was well logged in the police logs, multiple witnesses, the police, after that night, almost immediately disregarded everything they had said that night.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way, with the exception of the police chief and Brian Gosselin. I think, it's not something I'm too aware of, is how the police officers actually felt themselves about the incident. Like, they were told to keep quiet about it, is what we were, told during the filming, is that these police officers were told to keep quiet about it. But it is interesting to wonder, like, did these guys go home at night and say, talk about this incident with their families and things like that? Unfortunately, the way that town is, it would be next to impossible to ever find that out from speaking to their friends and family.
And you're listening to Paranormal Filler. My guest tonight is Seth Breedlove. We're talking about small town monsters.
TarotByKen.com. Unlike other tarot readers, Ken reads multiple spreads during each session to provide you with clear, concise answers and guidance. Don't take my word for it. I'm just a voice on the radio.
From Kelly, one reading with Ken completely changed things around for me. Jennifer, I feel so rejuvenated about my life. Melissa, it has changed my life. Visit tarotbyken.com to arrange your own tarot date, or you can call or text Ken at 859-229-4833. And we're back with Paranormal Filler. That's always hit me as strange, and it's not, and I guess, people I don't want people to think I'm crazy, but when you live in an area that has such a rich and well-known history of these type sightings, even if they just wanted to brush it off as, but looking back at it, I'm sure it's a bear, that type of thing. But to pretend it never happened when that's a forest. That's one thing, the beginning of the documentary shows very well, is this is not your typical woods out back. This is not Central Park. This is a very large area with very, relatively few people.
Yeah, definitely. It's an extremely isolated section of the country. We showed a kind of a map of it early on in the movie, and Paul Bartholomew talks about how you could fit 5 of the major national parks within the boundaries of the Adirondack Park. I mean, it's a massive area. It's when I say isolated, too, I'm talking like you can drive miles and miles and over an hour without ever seeing lights or a town. I mean, it's really back there. It's one of the more rural areas of the country I've ever been, and I've kind of been all over the country, so I've traveled a lot since I was a kid, but it definitely is an area where if you're a Bigfoot believer, you would expect these things to be, kind of roaming about, because it is a kind of a vast wilderness in some spots. I mean, there are, pockets of community, but for the most part, it's definitely this very rural community, and there are bears in that area. So, I mean, it just kind of depends. Like, if you're a believer, you would say this is where they are. If you're a skeptic, you would say, well, that's where black bear would be too. So maybe they just misidentified a black bear, which people, obviously, when the case did break, that was one of the things that a lot of people were claiming, was that, this might have been a black bear. And Brandon and I were out at the location, after dark, one night, which is a little unsettling, because not only because this is like the site of this historic Bigfoot occasion, but also because there's supposedly black bear dens that kind of pocket that whole region. And they're all around that road.
Black bears are not usually, unless you're farting around with your cubs, they're usually pretty easy to get along with.
Yeah.
I did the interviews that you did. I know you did get around to some of the town folks, although it wasn't a focus of the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Does that give you any insight, though, into the psychology of why an area that embraces the legend, even if they don't embrace every sighting, an area that can't help but embrace the legend just because of the affiliation with Native Americans, why it would be so taboo, even back in the 70s, to talk about this openly?
Well, it's actually less taboo now. I think back then it was way more. Yeah, it's really weird. I'll just like just being honest. It's a really unusual thing, because we came out of Ohio and making Minerva Monster, where Minerva Monster was accepted so with open arms, to the point that we have our own festival. We have a Minerva Monster Day festival. So in Ohio, people really love this kind of stuff. Whether or not you believe in it doesn't matter. It's still part of your local culture, so it's important. And then down in Falk, Arkansas, where we're working on our next movie, they love this thing, the subject and all that. And then you go up to New York, and it's like they still act as if they don't really want anything to do with it. So I don't quite understand why that is, other than maybe it's that kind of, and this isn't to demean anyone on the East Coast, because I'm kind of an East Coaster myself, but I mean, I think it's kind of that East Coast mentality maybe, where And it's just a different type of attitude in that country about everything. People are a little harder, maybe. They just, they really, a perfect example is like I spoke to Dan Gordon's son. Dan Gordon was the police officer who had his own sighting in 1984. And his son told me that he personally would never speak to anyone whether or not he believed in Bigfoot because the ridicule factor in that region is so high. I wanted to get him in the movie to kind of talk about his dad and his interaction with the case and all that kind of stuff, and he wouldn't have anything to do with it because he works as a warden, a prison warden, near Whitehall. And he said the outlook from the general public in that area is so negative toward it that he didn't want that connotation.
So even today, see, now that really shocks me because I thought the History Channel pretty well did away with that. I mean, let's face it, they finally, when the History Channel wore out the Nazi thing, then they jumped on the Bigfoot and UFO bandwagon big time. And I think it's really become quite mainstream along with what I'm into, ghostology, of course. Mm-hmm. But I find it all borderline mainstream, and I'm almost surprised it's not like I find in the ghost field. People walk up to me in the ghost field and they say, I don't believe in ghosts, and then tell me their ghost story. And so I guess you could say I don't understand why that. Of course, it might just be that part of the country, as you point out. Maybe they don't tell their ghost stories either.
I think the ridicule factor is extremely high, so it still makes everyone kind of leery about telling the story. Tell that story about that lady at that antique mall that we tried to get.
Yeah, we had found out that somebody that works at this local antique shop had a sighting of this creature in the Whitehall area, and so we were trying to get other sighting witnesses in the film. We have news footage of some witnesses from in history, yeah. But it's what we wanted, some kind of recent sighting for it's people that had never been on film before or on TV. And so, yeah, we found this woman who works at this antique shop. So we went in there to talk to her, and she was totally willing to talk to us about her sighting off camera. But as soon as we said we wanted it on camera, she wanted nothing to do with it. So I'm assuming that it was because of that ridicule factor. She just doesn't want her face to be, constantly associated with this creature or something.
Yeah, it's still that thing where people that claim to have seen Bigfoot get asked immediately how many drugs they're on and all that kind of stuff.
You couldn't have done the old camera trick where you film the back of her head.
Right. She wouldn't have she didn't want anything to do with the camera, period.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember. I watched one time and somebody did that. And so the guy just put the camera down like he wasn't using it, and it was still filming the whole time. And but I realize you don't want to be that. You don't want to be that type of documentary crew.
Yeah.
So now while we'll kind of use this to segue over into the other projects. Now, how do you film this? Now, of course, you sent me a link to the rough copy. Now, what do you all do with these documentaries after they're in the can and you're all tidied up and finished? How are you funding your continuing efforts? We'll put it that way.
Yeah, well, Whitehall and Minerva were funded out of pocket. Pretty much our own money went into them. Minerva Monster did have a Kickstarter campaign, but that was to fund the post-production of the movie, so the actual printing of DVDs and all that stuff. So it was basically just pre-orders. So we do all that kind of funding stuff, and then, or not funding stuff, but we put the movie together however we can. Like, Minerva was just whatever equipment we had laying around, and Whitehall was a little more, I had gone out and bought a nice camera, we had rented some good sound equipment, and then we came back from Whitehall, and basically at that point we just upload everything to the computer and proceed to mull over, however many hours of footage we have. I mean, we have, you have hours and hours of B-roll alone, let alone when you're talking about the, multiple camera angles on interviews. So that alone is a huge process and a real challenge. On this movie, it was kind of kind of a treat, actually, because on Minerva, it was a fairly large undertaking. We had 5 guys that made the movie, and then we had other people kind of come in and post and help out. So that was the larger team. On Whitehall, it was really just Brandon and I, and then obviously the artists. And then the other thing I got to mention is Clint, the narrator of the film, helped out in a big way and really helped to be able to flesh out the story. I don't think without our narration, we wouldn't be able to fill in a lot of the holes that we were able to because we weren't, some of these people aren't alive. But anyway, it was a 3-month process of editing on this particular project. And then, when it still isn't completely locked, although we're wrapping right now. But once that wraps, we're going to launch, for the first time ever, we're going to launch a Kickstarter campaign to fund the next movie. So the next movie is going to be Boggy Creek Monster, which is going to focus on the classic 1970s horror film Legend of Boggy Creek. And it'll, kind of tell the true story of some of the sightings that take place in the Fouke, Arkansas region. So we actually are going to try to crowdfund that movie entirely, so get every ounce of funding we need from our fan base. But yeah, that's kind of the quick overview.
Now you said Minerva Monster, which we'll cover in the next segment a little bit. We'll hear about it. That was pretty much a local story for you. And of course, Boggy Creek, that's reached urban legend, because of the movie and everything. But now, what brought Beast of Whitehall to your attention?
I was always aware of the Whitehall story because of the Monster Quest episode that ran on the History Channel. So I was acquainted with it because of that. But also, you hear a lot about Whitehall because of all the law officers and all that kind of stuff. What, I guess Brandon can speak to this too, but what drew me to the story wasn't just like the incidents that happened, but the fact that the day we had the premiere of Minerva Monster, Paul Gosselin, who was a vital player in the story, actually passed away. So the same day that we were premiering our first movie, and we were already aware of the Whitehall story and were pretty well locked on doing that next, Paul Gosselin passed away. So that kind of put kind of a racing the clock element to the whole thing, where, we need to make this movie, get these people on camera before, time and age catches up with some of these folks. And I know Brandon's a huge fan of Paul and his side of that story. So Brandon, what drew you to this?
Actually, originally Seth brought the story to my attention. I hadn't heard of it before he told me about it. And I didn't think, honestly, there was much there. He was saying, there's these teenagers and they're driving on a road in the middle of the night and they see this thing on the side of the street. And that's, as far as I knew, that was all the story was. But, since we really started to kind of investigate this and going out to the location, speaking with different witnesses, speaking with Paul Bartholomew a lot, he's given us so much information. There's so much more to the story than just, kind of a random sighting of a thing on the side of the road. Like we talked about earlier, you have basically the whole police department out, an entire week essentially of different aggressive sightings and that kind of stuff. So I guess the appeal for me of the story is just kind of the complexity of everything, how many characters are involved, the fact that there's, at least 11 police officers involved. And again, it goes over the course. It's been seen in that area for hundreds of years, Native American lands. And sightings continue up to this day, so it's incredible for me. Yeah.
Now, one thing that makes this stand out a little bit to me, I'm not saying it's unique, but it's not 100% across the Bigfoot spectrum. One thing they talk about so much, several of the stories focused on the red eyes of the beast. In particular, the guy with the golf course. We're going to take a quick break. We'll finish up with this, and then we'll be back. I want to hear about the Minerva Monster. Everybody, you're listening to Paranormal Filler. My guest is Seth Breedlove and Brandon Dalo. I am a believer. But I'm not talking about the paranormal right now. I'm talking about PC Matic. Nothing ever lives up to the hype. Like you, I've seen the TV commercials for PCmatic. Since I obviously have to rely on my computers, I decided to give it a try. Now, do you have an older computer running maybe Windows XP? I do. And it's running like it's fresh out of the box. As a matter of fact, I've installed PCmatic on all of my Windows desktops. And yes, I can tell the difference. So, if your computer is running slow or crashing, or if you just have to rely on your computers like I do, go to my website, paranormalfiller.com. Click the PCmatic banner and then try one of their free scans. PCmatic, for speed, stability, security, you won't be disappointed. Welcome back to Paranormal Filler. I'm your host, Wes Forsythe, and tonight we're with the people behind Small Town Monsters. Does anybody remember what I was talking about before the break? I got this.
The red eyes.
Yeah, the red eyes. That's what it was. The golf course guy almost seemed like he overplayed it. Which I don't want to say that took. I'm sure he saw something, and I'm sure his story. And maybe time kind of conflagrated what he saw. But the whole, the description he gave of the eyes was just, of course then again, it could play into something you mentioned earlier, the whole alien thing. Now I don't remember that being part of it. Very briefly, when were these alien, the UFO, sightings reported? Before, after, during?
It was kind of the same week. There was a brief mention of it in the film by Brian Gosselin, and then we also showed a news report. And I think the news report, the headline is something like "Big Hairy Monsters or Little Green Men." Whitehall residents are trying to figure out, who the monster is, something like it's I'm paraphrasing horribly, but that's something like what it is. But basically that same week that all this was going on, there was a massive amount of UFO sightings around Whitehall, to the point that there was actually a UFO landing reported in the center of town, the same week that all this was going on. In fact, like Paul Bartholomew sent me a map where he had circled where it took place, and I mean, it's literally almost smack dab in the middle of town, right out front of some woman's house. There was a UFO landing, and it even left a round circular landing patch, he called it. And so around that same time, there's a lot of this stuff going on. Now, something interesting, though, about that red eyes thing, beyond just, the UFO angle, is that there was a lot of there's a long history in that area of Bigfoot, and we went into that a little bit, in the film. But there apparently were reports, or not reports, but legend by Native Americans in that area of these creatures whose eyes glowed like, glowed like coal or glowed like tinder. I can't remember what the words were, but I thought that was intriguing. You definitely do not seem to find reports of this creature in that area without it being associated with the glowing red eyes. In fact, almost everyone in the movie recounted seeing that if they had some sort of close-up visual of the creature. So it is unusual. And definitely, like you said about Cliff Sparks sighting and how bizarre, like he talks about it shooting laser beams out of its eyes, which is really odd, and I thought the same thing. In fact, I think Brandon was originally hesitant to stick that Cliff Sparks interview in the front of the film because his worry was that it would throw people off, like people who aren't familiar with the subject or aren't really, who kind of, we kind of try to be as welcoming to newbies as we can be, and Brandon had some worries about, like, possibly turning off people because it's such an odd account,
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Brandon.
I was just going to say, especially at the very beginning. I think it's the first, essentially the first sighting report
in the film.
And so if you're somebody who's brand new, you're not really familiar with the subject, you're very skeptical. I was worried that the first sighting report that you hear, this guy, and he didn't necessarily say it was like he said he described it kind of like laser beams, because if you remember his sighting though was what I found interesting about it was that he's working on the golf course, he sees this thing standing there next to the woods. He says that he had his dog with him, and the creature looked at the dog more than it looked at him, and the dog just hung its head over the cart and laid there. And so I don't know if there's a connection, if this really happened, of course, as he recounts it, if there's a connection between kind of like the red eye situation and the dog being all kind of paralyzed. You know what I mean? And I'm still skeptical myself. I'm with Seth as far as thinking that if these things do exist, they're kind of a flesh and blood. There's no kind of paranormal or extraterrestrial aspect to them. But, if there is that paranormal aspect, then that could be a possible explanation, I guess, for a red eye situation. Because, like I said, it looked directly at the dog. He sees what looks like kind of zigzaggy laser beams coming out of its red eyes, and then the dog's kind of paralyzed in the cart. So I don't know.
He didn't happen to say what kind of dog it was, did he?
No.
I mean, if it's a little foo-foo dog that rides around in a golf cart. Because, from being a farm boy,
yeah.
We have these things we can get to scare off predators. And basically, it is two red eyes that you can set up. And it has something to do with top of the food chain type stuff. Mm-hmm. And so other predators will even avoid these red eye predator things. So I don't know. That's,
Well, explain that to me, though. I'm curious about that.
I don't know. They just claim it works. I wish I had more in-depth knowledge of it. But it's a little box you can set on a fence post. I think it's motion activated, and if anything activates it, these little red eyes light up, and they claim it scares off coyotes and raccoons and such things.
That's really fascinating.
I wouldn't go that far. But, but it is, some animals apparently do respond to that. So, I mean, that part of his story, I don't buy the laser beams necessarily, but that part of his story actually, in a rural sense, does make, something. Okay, let's get on to the Minerva monster. Now, this is the one that was your local legend. Could you, give us a rundown of that?
Yeah, in 1978, this family that lived off of the Lincoln Highway right outside of Minerva, Ohio, started sighting an unknown creature behind their house, kind of a monster. It was, like the A-Bear case, like the Whitehall case. It was upright walking and hair covered. This kind of fell into the more like 1970s unusual upright creature category than your typical Bigfoot sighting. This thing was covered head to toe in a lot of fur. Very similar to like the Momo case or the Big Muddy Monster kind of Bigfoot cases rather than your typical, Patty or A-Bear case. But they started sighting this creature behind their house, and one particular night, the creature actually, during a family gathering, came out of the woods and walked towards the family. So the family actually retreated into the house and called the police. When the police showed up, there was nothing there, but they did say they smelled a really unusual smell of ammonia around the house. And what happened is the local papers got a hold of the story, and the story kind of broke nationally. And even internationally, it became a really well-known case. There were news crews in Minerva that covered the story from Germany and Japan. It's still constantly talked about in Bigfoot circles, but obviously in the state of Ohio, the story kind of slipped out of mind. But what always fascinated me about the Minerva monster was the family, the Caton family, and their interactions with the creature and how they were kind of ridiculed in a way by the town, and which is obviously a common occurrence with these Bigfoot stories we hear about, is just kind of the ridicule factor. So that's kind of a general overview of what Minerva Monster is about.
Now, you throw in the ridicule factor against the family, but now earlier you mentioned that the actual area has, at some point, embraced the story to the point that they have a festival and everything.
Yeah. Brandon can talk about that too. When this all happened in 1978, it was so out of control that they would have people driving up their driveway screaming Bigfoot at like all hours of the night. Howie Caton, the youngest boy, told us that kids in school made his last year of high school a living hell. The town had signs at local establishments that would say things like Bigfoot eats here or Bigfoot washes here. The family went to a football game and the crowd chanted Bigfoot. But after that incident kind of happened, I guess just like you were talking about how it's kind of gone mainstream, the subject of Bigfoot's kind of gone mainstream. I think that's what we're seeing in Minerva, where it's a more accepted topic now. And it's been basically a 180 as far as the town's concerned. We had our own festival there last summer. Saw anywhere from 12 to 1,500 people come out. The Caton family was applauded during a screening of the movie. It's just been kind of a complete about face on that front. So that's really, it is interesting to see the difference between here and New York, because here it just seems like they love it. I mean, we're already planning next year's, or I guess this year's, Minerva Monster Day, and it's going to become an annual event. So it's just been a complete change for the family, and it's become a really like positive experience for them too.
Now, does the area have a history of Bigfoot sightings, or was this an anomaly that just took off on the media?
And this is Northeast Ohio, so it is very, very close to what Don Keating calls the Sasquatch Triangle in Ohio, which is this area where tons and tons of sightings have occurred. It's within, as the crow flies, it's probably not 30 minutes from Salt Fork State Park, which is kind of considered the Bigfoot Mecca of Ohio. You're not far at all from Pennsylvania. Beaver Creek State Park is maybe 35 minutes away. So this whole region in Ohio is rife with reports. We've covered a lot of these reports. I've done a lot of research on that, on this particular story. And also, I grew up about 25 minutes from Minerva down the road. So, and in my hometown where I grew up, there were Bigfoot reports growing up. So that whole area of Ohio is very rife with forest and tree cover and big rivers and water sources. It's also got one of the most fertile white-tailed deer populations in the country. And so Brandon's dad actually lived down there for a while. You can talk a little bit more about what the terrain's like and stuff.
Yeah, he had a cabin down there for a few years. In fact, just a few miles from the Caton property. But I mean, the terrain it's hilly, and covered in woods. The thing is, like, you'll see, that was kind of a difference from between Minerva and Whitehall was, you'll see like a huge patch of woods and you'll think that goes on forever in Ohio. But if you look on, a satellite picture, you'll see, a lot of times you'll see big patches of woods, and then you'll see someone's farm or property and then another big patch of woods, which is completely contrasting to Whitehall, which is like just woods, forest as far as you can possibly see in either on all directions. But yeah, so the Minerva, the whole area down there is wooded enough to where something like this you could say could potentially exist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can say that if Whitehall is thicker than the area you're talking about. Now, I can't say that Northern Ohio stuck in my mind, but I do know I've driven through northern Pennsylvania in the dark. You do not see lights from the interstate. You don't see lights in the distance. I was driving through there, and that's one thing that stuck in my mind, that if I was a Bigfoot, I don't think I would have any trouble hiding out.
You wouldn't.
Now,
it's the same story here.
So if it's even worse, if it's even more wooded up in Whitehall, I can definitely see that. Now, one more thing I want to cover before we move on to Boggy Creek. I want to go ahead and find out your own personal beliefs. Is your interest in this more about the folklore aspect, or do the two of you think that there is some cryptid creature moping about the woods in these places that needs further investigation, needs further documentation?
Well, I believe that the subject definitely warrants a lot of investigation. I'm not a believer, but I don't think that there's a quick, pat answer to it either. The only reason I'm not a believer is I've never seen one, and, I do have a lot of questions for why they might not exist. I am definitely interested in the psychology behind it and the folkloric aspect as well, and kind of the cultural impact of it. But I just don't think that there's a quick, pat answer to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I'm skeptical, but for me, I think it is. I mean, obviously, the subject itself, the creatures, if they do exist, are extremely fascinating and all that. But I think for me, it's more so the human element from this whole thing. It's like how the Caton family, for example, the Minerva monster was affected by this, how it shaped their lives. That's way more kind of exciting or not exciting, but it's way more interesting, I guess, to me, than, what the actual creature. But that's not to say that I'm not fascinated by what these things could possibly be if they're really out there and all that. So I'm skeptical as well, but I think for me, it's more so the human element. In Whitehall, you have the same thing. It's like when we go, I'll tell people, what the movie's about, friends or new people that I meet, and some people will, kind of scoff at it or laugh at it or whatever, just like you'll get that. But I'll explain to them, it's like, when you go out to these locations and you talk to these individuals, and you can see, you'll see Brian Gosling, for example, in the film, and he talks about how he's getting goosebumps, talking about it, and he's got tons of emotion in his voice, and you know that he saw something out there. So, of course, what he saw is the question, but I think that's that kind of side of the whole story is kind of what's most fascinating for me. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left in the show. Tell us what you're trying to do with the Boggy Creek legend, because here you're working around, a movie that has brought it into the I'll say the mainstream. But are you trying to do a similar type story, or what do you have in store for us there?
Well, Small Town Monsters definitely follows a set format. So I love the idea of doing 3 chapters and kind of focusing on the town first, and then introducing some of the major sightings, and then focusing on what the follow-up was like. So as far as the format, I think that's probably the direction we'll take, but I'm 100% sure it's not going to be like Minerva or Whitehall, because Whitehall, while it is similar in some ways to Minerva, it's also very different. There's a lot of handheld stuff as far as like following witnesses around at the sighting locations. We didn't do that in Minerva. So I'm sure we'll find different ways to tell the story. But yeah, like you said, there's this famous movie behind it. So that's part of what drew me to it, is the Boggy Creek story is really well known as far as those early sightings taking place. But I don't know that a lot of people understand that the sightings didn't start in 1971 when the movie was released, and they didn't stop in 1971 when the movie was released. So there's a long history of sightings in that area, and it's still going on today. Lyle Blackburn, who's going to be working on the movie with us, told me that he thinks he's documented over 50 sighting reports himself. That would be leaving out those original sightings. So if you factored those into it as well, and all the other sightings that have been documented over the years, you're probably, well over 100, I would think. So we kind of want to focus on that, and what people are seeing, what the differences are between this creature and the typical creatures that are reported elsewhere. The Boggy Creek creature is always seems to be a more like angry, kind of lonesome, forlorn, mean dude sauntering around the swamps of the South. And I love that idea. So we want to get into that history, obviously, as well. And this one, like I said earlier, we're going to be launching a Kickstarter next Sunday to fund the production of this one. So we're going to have a lot of cool stuff involved in that, like t-shirt, like Boggy Creek Monster t-shirts and posters and all that kind of stuff. And then one of the coolest things about that is you're actually going to be able to, if you back the Boggy Creek Monster Kickstarter, you'll actually be able to see Beast of Whitehall a month ahead of the actual release. So, but I guess for me, Boggy Creek Monster is all about getting to kind of bring everything that we learned on our first two movies to bear on this story that's kind of prominent throughout the cryptid world.
Okay, now let's get our plugs in. Where can people go to find out more about your projects, both past, present, and future, and to get on board for this Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, definitely. The website is smalltownmonsters.com, and you can buy our movies. Right now it's just Minerva, but Whitehall will be up there very soon. It's shop.smalltownmonsters.com. And Facebook is facebook.com/smltownmonsters. And Kickstarter is just kickstarter.com. I'll have an official URL the day it launches. So if you're following us on Facebook, you'll be able to keep up with all that stuff. But you know, I know Whitehall is going to be on TV in April, in New York State, possibly on more than one channel. So if you're in New York State and you're interested in that project, make sure you're following us on Facebook so we can kind of keep you updated on what stations are going to be playing the movie. And then we're also supposed to have some sort of event in New York in that month as well. So kind of the big thing to follow is the Facebook page and then the shop.smalltownmonsters, and the Kickstarter goes live again on Sunday.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on Paranormal Filler. Good luck with the current and future project.
Awesome. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you so much.
And everyone, I would like to thank you for listening to Paranormal Filler. This has been the first hour for January 24th, 2016. Those of you listening on WIHGradio.com, stay tuned for the upcoming second hour. Everyone else, thanks for tuning in.
paranormal